Toss out the 5-star reviews because those are lazy, and toss out the 1 and 2-star reviews because those are typically emotionally written. And look at the 3 and 4-star reviews. That's where you'll see things like, I bought the book for this reason, and it delivered most of the benefits it said it would, but here's where it fell short. So the more reviews, the better, because life is too short to read bad books. The 3 and 4-star reviews will give you the context that you need.
Create for No Reason is your weekly dose of inspiration to create what you believe should exist in the world. It's where passion meets craft, and we explore the joy of the creative process and building a meaningful body of work. I'm so excited about this episode because we are talking all about books and how to read more intentionally. So all the books that you have on your shelf, you know how sometimes you might read a book and you think, oh my God, it was so good. And there were all of these strategies, but you don't remember all of them. Well, our guest today, Nick Hutchison, he is the founder of BookThinkers, and he knows all about how to retain great information from books because he recently wrote his book, Rise of the Reader. And so we got into some of the strategies that he uses to help people master their reading habits and apply what you learn. So there you go. That's what we talk about in this episode. I hope you enjoy. Nick, so great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
I'm excited to be here. This is episode number 2. I can't believe our first conversation on your podcast was 2 years ago.
I
And
know,
so
isn't
there's a
that
lot to
wild?
update you on.
I know so much to talk about, so many things to discuss. You are, first of all, when we first talked, you were not yet a published author, and now you are. And you're also a new dad,
Yeah.
which you're such a creator. So you've been creating so many things in the world.
Now I create humans. So that's a whole new thing.
Oh my gosh, that's wild. That's wild. So you published your book, Rise of the Reader: Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learn, which is obviously the book that you would write considering what you do. I mean, you talk about books, you read all the books, you give everybody what should we be reading, what should we be learning. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, what inspired you to actually sit down and write the book? I'm sure you had the idea for a while, but to actually write a book it's a lot of work, obviously.
Rise of the Reader started years and years ago when I was in Colombia. So we talked last time about my love for travel, and we even talked a little bit about my love for Colombia. So anyway, I was sitting there working behind the computer, and I had a call with one of our partners who works in the industry helping authors create books. And she gave me a special offer. She said, hey, if you ever have the inspiration to write a book, I'd love to work out some type of deal with you where we help build it in exchange for an ad in the back. And I was thinking, well, that's a really fun offer. And so I sat back after that conversation and started to think about, if I had to write a book, what would it be about? And at the time, I was getting a ton of questions every single week about my reading process. Because, like we talked about last time, I have this community, BookThinkers. We do anywhere from hundreds of thousands to millions of views per month talking about nonfiction books. And so I get questions like, how do I choose the right book? How do I take notes? What do I do with those notes? How do I take that knowledge and turn it into action? How do I remember what I've read? And so I started to collect these questions. And then I thought to myself, I should write a book that answers all of them. So it's a book about how to use other books, which is a little funny to think about. But that's how I was inspired. I was given the opportunity.
It's so meta.
It
It's
is. Yeah,
like
it's meta.
it's a beautiful book, and what I thought was really interesting about this idea, well, two things. One, I think it's a really great idea, and obviously you saw the need for when people were reaching out to you. I meet a lot of people, some of whom really love books, some who don't, and some that just kind of feel like if you ask them what were the top 3 takeaways or what did you really learn from it, it's almost like they remember the essence of the, but they don't really remember the things that they learned. And there are some books, especially some of the personal development books, that have, they're very rich in content, in the ideas that they give to you. Some are a little bit more high level and some are like really intense. But like, for example, Atomic Habits, he gives you like a guide on how to create better habits. So when you wrote this book, what I really enjoyed about it and what made it different than other books is, well, first, there's not a lot of books that are embarking on this topic, but you put a lot of your personal stories on how you've developed these habits. And I wanted to see if you had any favorites. Like, for example, I loved your Thursday night rum and Coke strategy or your the rule of 25% strategy. Let's talk about the rule of 25% because I really loved this strategy that you had. And I think this is pertinent to people, not just in reading, just in life in general.
Sure. So years and years before I decided to write the book, I was watching a TED Talk actually by Ty Lopez. Now, Ty Lopez is is a famous internet marketer. Here in my garage with the Lamborghini, a lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him, but I think that whenever somebody's at the top of their game, there's something that you can learn from them, right? So Ty Lopez was talking about what he called the rule of 33%. He said you should spend 33% of your time with mentors, 33% of time with peers, and 33% of your time teaching and giving back. And I thought, well, you're missing an entire section, time with yourself. There's a great quote, I think it's by George Bernard Shaw, where he says, all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room with his own thoughts, or something like that. And a lot of my personal development hasn't come from mentorship. It hasn't come from working with peers and accountability partners, and it hasn't come from teaching people. It's come from thoughts and reflection. And so I decided to add that fourth category, which took it from 33% down to 25. And so I modified something that was out there and kind of made it my own. And so to give a little bit more of a recap, I do recommend spending around 25% of your time learning from mentors. Mentors are people who have done what you want to do and have done it really well, maybe to the, 10x what you're looking to achieve. And they've also helped other people get there. Now, most of the time, those mentors aren't affordable or willing to sit down and spend so much time with you. But mentors can come in the form of books. You can sit down and read about the world's smartest and most efficient people in any subject for $20 and in a few hours of your time, again, by reading books. And I had a mentor tell me recently, Kate, that he would rather sit down and read somebody's book than actually get one-on-one mentoring from that person because he said the book represents years and years of refining those thoughts into very specific language. So you're getting the best version of what that person has to teach you instead of one-on-one mentorship, which can be kind of messy. So that's the first 25%. The second is with your peer group. These are people who are fighting the same fight. They're in the same stage as you, and you can hold each other accountable to taking the path of most resistance instead of living a mediocre life where you barely tolerate your own existence. Like these are people who can push you to the next degree, and they're reading a lot of the same resources. So that's a great way to spend your time as well. Kind of you are the average of the five people that you spend the most time with type of thinking. So you want to make sure those people are also reading and implementing great books and learning. The next one is teaching, giving back, mentoring other people. I think one of the best ways to retain the information you read is to teach it to other people. So not only are you putting out like positive karmic energy by giving the universe something and by lifting other people up, but you're also strengthening your understanding of that material. Again, another great strategy for attention is having to simplify that information so that you can teach it to other people. And then the last 25%, which is the one that I added into Ty's teachings, is again time with yourself. That can be reading, it could be journaling, it could be meditation, it could be time in the gym. It's really important to create space, I think, for your brain to do the work of reading and working with other people and teaching and giving back. You need some time to decompress and kind of analyze all of that information. And that's time with yourself. So 4 quadrants, 4 things that I think we should all add into our week.
So the first one, which around the mentorship, that's interesting that people that would prefer to read someone's book versus mentorship with them. That kind of is surprising, but it does make sense because it takes a lot of time. It's like that quote. I love that quote. I would have written a shorter note. I just didn't have the time.
Right.
And when you have someone that's really thinking through, okay, what are the big ideas? And then honing in on, okay, what are the ideas that I think are the most important? And then how can I convey them in the easiest way possible? So it's a lot of work to do that. So to be able to get that type of knowledge from someone, I mean, then of course it'd be great to ask some questions after you've read their book.
Yeah, and you know who told me that, Kate, was Kevin Horsley, who I wrote about in the book a little bit. He's the author of Unlimited Memory. He memorized the first 10,000 digits of pi. I mean, just
Jeez.
brilliant mind, right? And he's the one that told me that, and he's read thousands of personal development books, and he gets more out of them than the one-on-one mentorship and the access to the superstars in the industry. And I thought, that really resonated with me because it's kind of like a shock and awe at first. You go, I don't really understand why you would want that. But just like you highlighted, and I don't know if it's Winston Churchill or who says that quote. But yeah, sorry if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
I know. That's like, I mean, that's what it's like writing a book. So for someone who has so you have this channel, Book Thinkers, you read a lot, obviously. When I think about someone like you to have written a book, like first of all, you're around so many books. You read, you have all this knowledge, and I think some people think, what can I teach? Like to get to that teaching quadrant. What am I capable of teaching versus like, is it is it teaching or is it kind of just taking other ideas? Like there's no new ideas out in the world, right? So how do you decide what am I going to talk about and what's mine versus what you've learned and studies from other people? Like how do you make that distinction?
So I had that same thought. It was an insecurity of mine. You could call it a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, first off, when the book came out, I was in my late 20s. Am I old enough to write a book? Am I credible enough to write a book? Do I have anything new to share with the world? Like, why would somebody want to read this? And so, I keep bringing up the travel stuff, but this time I was not sitting in Colombia, but I was sitting in Iceland, in Reykjavik, with one of my friends. He's an author. And I was sharing this insecurity with him. And he said to me, Nick, who are some of your favorite authors? And I said, I love Ryan Holiday. He's one of my favorite authors. I would read anything he puts out. And he said to me, interesting pick. Ryan Holiday, all he does is regurgitate an ancient philosophy. And he's read hundreds of books and he pieces them together and presents them in a new way. And I thought, good point. He said, who's your next favorite author? And I'd named a couple of people, Robert Greene. Well, all Robert Greene does in his books is take hundreds of other books and consolidate his favorite lessons from them, reorganize it, and then put it out there as new and fresh. And we started to go down the list, and almost all of my favorite authors were doing some version of that same thing. And so sometimes it's about the time and the place. Sometimes it's about the messenger and their ability to market and promote the message. But I did have something unique, which was I had read and implemented hundreds of books. I created my ideal life in my 20s. And I knew that anybody else could do the same thing. And so I was unique in that I had read just those books and I was living just my life and I had my ability to present it in a unique voice. And so that kind of removed the fear and the insecurity and the imposter syndrome. And I thought, you know what? I am well positioned to serve the version of me 10 years ago who is just getting into the space. And I'm going to write the book for that person. So I don't need to be a know it all. I don't need to be the world's foremost expert on personal development books. But I do have a lot I can teach that younger version of Nick when he's just getting excited about these books.
Oh my gosh, I love that you said that because that I feel like that is someone needs to hear that because I think a lot of especially when you're a newer creator, you get that imposter syndrome, but you are creating for the person that is a couple steps behind you. And it's really challenging because when you are such a voracious reader and learner, you are looking up to so many other people. So you're reading their work and thinking, oh my, like sometimes I would get stuck in my head, like, oh, what would so and so think about that? Well, that person's not reading my work most likely,
Right.
right? Like they're looking. I always make that reference of when Damon John from Shark Tank, how he says he was doing a live stream and he said, "You guys are all trying to be more like me." He's like, and that's amazing, and I wanna support you in that, but also, like, what do you think I'm doing? I'm looking at Richard Branson saying, "I wanna be like Richard." So, everyone has that different level of where they are, and the stuff that you're creating, as long as you're true to yourself and what you're sharing, and you're sharing your unique experience, which you do, obviously, and you have some interesting ways of retaining. This is something very helpful for people because especially if you read a lot of books, especially if you read a lot of personal development books. What are some of the best strategies in addition to teaching, which is one of the best ones, like you said. But what are some other strategies when people are sitting down to read a book? How can they prepare better to read the book? And what can they do to make sure that we're actually retaining the information that we're reading?
Yeah, I have so much to share, as you know, on this subject. So I love to start when I meet somebody at a conference or when I meet somebody online. I love to start by asking, what are you currently reading? And then they'll tell me, and then I'll say, why? And they'll be like, what do you mean, why? Like, why'd you decide to pick up the book? And oftentimes you'll get a shallow response like, oh, a friend gave it to me, or I saw it on Instagram and I thought it looked cool. And so I think a lot of people, they don't know what their intention for the book is. They're suffering from what I jokingly call intention deficit disorder. They just have a light reason, right? They're not emotionally connected to the material. And so what I recommend doing is starting with a problem that you want to solve in your life or a skill that you want to build or a person you want to learn more about, and then choose the book. And so you're starting to build a little bit more of a reason, a little bit more of an emotional connection to the material, and you're starting to visualize an outcome. So when I am giving a book recommendation to somebody, I'll bring them through a list of questions. And we'll start with the ones that I just mentioned. Like, what problems are you dealing with on a daily basis that you just can't solve? What pain do you experience every single day? And they'll name something related to their personal finances or their relationship or their business or their health. And then we can find a book that promises to solve that problem. Or we'll talk about what skills are you looking to level up over the next 12 months? Who do you want to be, not at the start of 2025, but walking into 2026? What's that version of you look like? And what are the differences between where you are today and where you want to be? What skills do you think that person needs to acquire? And then we'll find a book about building that skill. So I think the entire process starts by slowing down a little bit and getting more intentional about what we're choosing to read. Once we find a good book, and we could talk strategies for finding good books too, but once we find a good book, my next suggestion, and this one only takes 5 minutes to do, is to set a SMART goal before you read the book. SMART is a goal setting acronym that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And if you set a SMART goal for each book that you read, you're so much more likely to implement something amazing from it. So I'll give you an example. If you're listening to this today and you want to check out my book, Rise of the Reader, before you actually read the book, set a SMART goal like I'm looking to find and implement at least 2 retention strategies that I can use to get more from the books I'm reading by the end of March. And so that's specific. You know exactly what you're looking for, 2 retention strategies. It's measurable. At the end of the experience, did you implement 2 new retention strategies? Yes or no? It's black and white. You know whether or not you hit your goal. Is it attainable? Of course it is. Just 2 strategies. I didn't say like I want to read and implement 1,000 books next year, but I'm just looking to make incremental progress. Is it relevant? Well, we're both lifelong learners and voracious readers. You know, we're reading these books, so we might as well get more from them. So, of course, it's relevant to me and I'm emotionally connected to making it happen. And then the T, time bound, by the end of March. You give yourself a deadline to take action. We all remember being like that young student who had a project due on Monday morning and you procrastinate for 2 weeks and you get it all done on Sunday night. That's Parkinson's law. It states that a task will expand to the amount of time that you give it. And so if you don't give yourself a deadline for taking action on the books you read, oftentimes you'll never take any action because you'll continue to procrastinate. And so that's the next strategy is get really clear about what you're reading and why you're reading it, and then set that SMART goal. And I've got a lot of other things to share, but I think those 2 things alone would solve most of the problems that readers are facing today.
It's interesting. Most people don't think about setting goals for reading. We're just taught, okay, read books. So now what are your strategies to find great books? Because here's where I want to read all the books, Nick. I love all the books. And so there's so many that are recommended to me or that I look at or that I'm on Amazon. I have so many books that I want to read that I have that I buy. I'm like addicted to buying books. And I have all the intention of reading them, but then I've noticed that I just have stacks that I I'm going to get to someday or one day, but how do people pick the right books at the right time?
I'm with you. So I also suffer from some of those same problems. I buy a lot of books, I have a lot of books, and I don't read all of them. But over time, I'm getting a little bit more selective. I remember watching a video a couple of years ago of Carl Sagan, philosopher, kind of theologian type person. And he was standing in a big library and the camera was kind of zoomed in on him. And he said, if you read one book a week for the rest of your life, you'd read this many books. And he kind of walks a few feet and he shows you how many books it would be. And then he zooms out to the rest of the library and says something like, life is too short to read bad books. Look at how many books are out there. And I mean, now I think I saw an updated statistic, like there are over 200 million different books sold on Amazon. And so, yeah, there are a lot of choices. Here's what I think. Again, get really specific about what problems you want to solve, what skills you want to build, what people you want to learn about, or who you want to learn from. I think once you start to look at reading through that lens, you start to shut out a lot of random books. Don't just get excited because you see a book on social media or that one of your friends has read a book and you thought it might look cool. Like read with your own intention, not their intention for you. One of my favorite strategies, other than asking book thinkers or checking out what we promote on our social media pages, is that when you go on Amazon and you search a specific subject, like a business book or a book on starting a business, you'll get flooded with a lot of responses. I do think that platforms like Amazon that have a lot of data do provide some benefit. The more reviews a book has, typically the better it has performed over time. It's really tough for a book to perform well over time without it actually creating a lot of impact in somebody's life. So some of these best-selling books that have existed for a long time are best-selling for a reason. They're creating a lot of change. And I see the opposite from a book marketing perspective. As a book marketer, right? I own BookThinkers. We help authors promote and market their books. If you make a little bit of a splash because you're famous or you have a social media following, your book will spike in sales for a short period of time, but then it'll stop selling because it's not actually creating change for the reader. And so again, the more reviews a book has, I think the better it probably will be at solving that problem or building that skill for you. Another one of my favorite tips is when you jump into the review section on a book like that, toss out the 5-star reviews because those are lazy, and toss out the 1 and 2-star reviews because those are typically emotionally written. And look at the 3 and 4-star reviews. That's where you'll see things like, I bought the book for this reason, and it delivered most of the benefits it said it would, but here's where it fell short. And you'll get a lot of very good context reading 3 and 4-star reviews. So the more reviews, the better, because life is too short to read bad books. And I think that the 3 and 4-star reviews will give you the context that you need.
That is so true about the 3 and 4 star. Sometimes I'll go to a 1-star review and it's it's like, "I thought this was a poetry book, but it's not." And I'm like, "It wasn't even promoted as a poetry book. So why that that's your problem."
Right, right.
Do you think you're gonna write another book?
Yes, but I don't have any plans to do it anytime soon. So Rise of the Reader last year sold, or over the last year, sold 10,000 copies. And
Wow.
I was able to sell those copies into my own community and doing podcast interviews and just kind of my own little internal network. But I've realized that if you want to get a book to that next level, like if you want to sell 100,000, 200, 500, a million copies, that's a whole different game. And so I'm starting to realize behind the scenes how that game is played, and it's a whole lot of extra work. So I think until I see a gap in the market again, like I'm getting a request for some type of specific information and I don't have a book recommendation for it, I don't know that I'm that eager to write another one just yet.
What did you find the most challenging about writing your book?
Prioritizing the time to write it. As a small business owner with a growing company, as a new dad, as somebody who loves endurance sports, like I got into triathlons and I'm doing Spartan races all the time. It's like, it's a lot to balance your health, your wealth, your happiness, your relationships, world travel, like all of that kind of stuff. And so just finding the time to write the book and not let other priorities overtake the time that I dedicated to writing, that was tough for me. It took a lot longer to actually write the book. than I originally wanted it to.
Yeah, that's like we talked about, it takes a while to really formulate all of the ideas that you wanna share, and then some things that you realize don't even belong in the book that you thought were gonna be in the book, and then what to include, what not to include. There's just a lot of creative decisions that have to be made, and, I mean, that you make those creative decisions even with what you're doing with BookThinkers and what you're gonna be promoting and sharing and how you're gonna be growing and building that. When you think about, like, what is your dream for BookThinkers and what you've been doing with that? Because it's such a cool it's just such a cool business. It's a cool model. I feel like there's not a lot of people in that space that have been so dedicated and committed to helping people with finding really great books to read. So what is your dream for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you what am I optimizing for today? I'm enjoying the passage of time. I love the life that I have and the reality that I've designed. And so I really just want more of it. BookThinkers is a business. We've got 10 people on our team now, and we
Wow.
help hundreds of authors a year promote and market their books behind the scenes with short form video content and podcast booking and social media book reviews and a whole bunch of other cool services. And then, of course, we have the readers side, right? We have hundreds of thousands of people paying attention to our podcast and our social media content, and we're getting people connected with books all the time. So I love every single aspect of that, and I just want more and more and more and more of the same, which sounds kind of goofy, but there's no different reality that I envision that's like super different from the one I have today. I just want to kind of stay in it and be present and do more and more and more of the same. Yeah, we have traditional business goals. Like next year, we have a revenue goal and a certain number of authors that we want to serve and a whole bunch of other things that we're measuring. But for me, it's just really showing up every day with a smile on my face and loving what I do, which is connecting people with books that can change their life.
I have to say, you have this presence about you that is so calm
Thank you.
and focused. It's so it's lovely. It's beautiful because I think it's so easy for us to kind of be all over this place, but it's clear that you have really done the work with all the things that you read and internalized it and built this life. Even for you to recognize where you are and the intentionality that you have with what you're creating is remarkable. And I just want to highlight that because I think that can go a little bit unnoticed because a lot of people that have a lot of ideas get very flustered around wanting to do everything, be everything, try everything, and have more, more, more. But you seems like you're very intentional about what you're creating and you're enjoying the process, which can be challenging as well.
I've read too many stories, a lot of them are behind me, of people who failed to realize that until it was too late. People
Yeah.
who prioritized financial success over family success or spiritual success or mental health or physical success. And I just never wanted to be that. I've also read books where people have their cake and eat it too, like they figure out how to balance all of it. And so I've worked really hard at developing skills as well as systems and perspectives that serve that state that you just talked about, which is peace. There's a line in the Bible that talks about a peace that passes all understanding. And that's sort of what I'm trying to optimize for. And I genuinely feel it. I really do. And it hasn't always been that way, right? I mean, for the last 10 years, I've focused on soft skills like emotional intelligence. I used to be, and we talked about this a little bit during our first episode, which I was sharing, I re-listened to today, where in my early 20s, I was emotionally reactive. I was really insecure. I had an ego that got the best of me in a lot of different relationships. I was not a lot of fun to be around all the time. And as a result of those behaviors, there was no peace. There was just, I want something more. I want something different. And so I've spent the last 10 years meditating, exercising, journaling, doing breath work, doing all sorts of things to calm that inner state and get to this place where I'm just constantly like happy and at peace. It's a stoic joy. It's not always yay every single day and like super outwardly charismatic, but it's really stable. And it's hard to knock me out of that. Like it really is. I mean, the world would have to blow up in order for me to be like, okay, I should pay attention to that, you know? So I think that it's the result of reading and implementing all of these books and learning the strategies that worked for other people. And sometimes it took them decades and decades and decades to figure out. And then they figure it out and you get to read about it and implement it over the course of like weeks instead of decades. And I just think it's the greatest life hack ever.
Ugh, well, you can tell. You can tell it's like it exudes from you, which is awesome. Which good for you to learn that so young. My goodness.
Thank you.
Is there a book or books that really surprised you? Like you weren't really sure about it, you kind of heard about it, you weren't really sure you're going to read it, but it really surprised you and made an impact in your life that you now recommend to people?
Yes, I have tons of recommendations like that. I mean, there are some classics that maybe I had some resistance to reading that I ended up reading, like The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, that now I recommend to everybody who will listen. And my ideas change over time too. I'll give you an example with that book. I try to read it now once per year. And every time I read it or listen to it, I get different takeaways. You know, I'd argue you can never read the same book twice. And this most recent one, talking about designing your reality, you know, when I used to read it, it was about travel and exploring the world, and then it became a little bit more about, you know, stating your intentions to the universe and about things like The Secret and abundance. And then more recently, when I read it, I thought, okay, alchemists are people who can take any random metal and turn them into gold. And I was like, today, modern day alchemists are people who can take an average set of circumstances and then design their dream reality. And I was like, oh, we're all alchemists in our own way, right? So there's takeaways like that. But I'll mention a book that almost nobody has heard of because it's a small book. It's called The Pulse Cure, Pulse, like your pulse, your heartbeat. The Pulse Cure, and it's by a Norwegian doctor, Dr. Torkel Farrow, and he was working in the traditional medical system, and he just realized that the entire medical system was designed around dealing with symptoms and not root cause problems. And so the book is about how the wearable devices that we have, like the Aura Ring, or I'm not wearing it, but my Garmin watch, how we can use these devices that measure our biology to make health improvements. And so he argues that heart rate variability, which is a random thing that most people don't pay attention to, is actually the number one predictor for health and longevity. And so you should start using these devices to measure things like your heart rate variability. And I have been obsessed and like down that rabbit hole for the last 6 months. So that's definitely one that I strongly recommend to everybody.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I've never heard of that, which I feel like I've heard of a lot of books.
Yeah, the Pulse Cure. I definitely recommend it.
What is one common characteristic that you see in all of the authors that you promote?
That they want the world to be a better place. They figured something out, and that thing could solve a lot of problems or help somebody live up to their potential, and they just wanna get the message out there. I think that in a world of, you know, there's a lot of division when you look on the news, there's a lot of negativity, there's a lot of people out there complaining and acting like victims and pointing fingers, but at the same time, there are a lot of people who just want to make the world a better place, and thank God BookThinkers gets to represent a lot of them. You know, like the example I just gave, Dr. Torkel Farrow. He realizes this issue in the medical system. He just wants people to feel healthier and happier and not have these issues. And so he shares how we can use today's technology to improve our lives. Like, of course, I want to promote somebody who just wants people to feel better. And I think it's very positive, and I think it's beautiful that there are so many people who, instead of figuring something out and then closing the curtains and just kind of moving on with their life, like they write a book and they try to share it with the world. And there's something really cool about that.
Yeah, anyone that writes a book, it is a lot of work. So
Yeah.
you have to care deeply about the topic. All right, Nick, you are awesome. I'm so happy that we got to do this again. I'm so proud of you for finishing your book. It really is awesome. There's not only it goes well into other just habits to live a better life. It's not just around books and reading books. And you talk about so many different ideas. That's what I thought was so interesting about it too when I got it. I was thinking, actually, I thought, I go, how did Nick write a book all about just reading and the habits of reading? And then when I saw all the other things you added, like the cardio and breath work and all the other, I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense. If somebody wants to know how to be a better reader, of course they want to learn all these other habits. We're trying to be a better human, a better person. So definitely check out the book. I also loved another section, and I talked about this to people too. You talked about the challenge, something around the challenge of personal or self-help books. So you have a little chapter on that section too, which I think is a good idea for people to explore, especially those that are kind of addicted to reading self-help books but don't actually apply the things. So your book will help people do just that. Before I let you go, I always ask at the end of the episode, what is one activity that the listeners can do in 10 minutes or less to live a more creative and fulfilling life?
My answer, I don't know what my answer to that was last time because I don't remember, but I've been getting more into breath work recently, and there's an app that I just started to use called Beats and Breath. And I think that they offer a bunch of free stuff in like the free trial version of the app. It's kind of like Headspace, the meditation app, but for breath work. And what's cool is it's all about music. So there's music that goes with the rhythm of the breaths, and there's different breathwork sessions for different outcomes. So based on how you breathe, you could ramp yourself up and get energized and focused, or you could slow yourself down and get into a calm state before you go to bed. And there's a bunch of different tracks on there. It's really cool. So that's something that you could do. It's free, doesn't cost any money to breathe, and it will change your state. You can feel better. You can slow things down. It's awesome. So that's my recommendation for today.
Beautiful. I love it, and that's a new one. We've been getting a lot of people start saying the same things, and so this was a little different twist. So
Yeah, good,
and a
good.
fun resources. Nick, thank you so much. I hope that you have the best time being a dad. This is so exciting for you. I'm so excited for all of your new creations, and I'm so excited to continue to watch your journey as you build this community at Book Thinkers and just everything that you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing all of this content with the world. When people talk about how people are going to stop reading books, I'm like, no, we will never stop reading books. We need books. We need more people that love books. So thank you for the work that you do. I appreciate you.
Yeah, books are making a comeback. And thank you for the interview today. And I look forward to having you on our show sometime soon.
Yes, I'm so excited. And there you have it. I hope you are inspired to read more books or to read a little bit differently, to approach your reading habit a little bit differently, to create some of those SMART goals around your reading habit and see if that kind of shifts your energy when it comes to reading. I love these ideas. I really appreciate having Nick on the show. As always, I hope you got at least one takeaway. You should have gotten a few because Nick shared quite a few little strategies and tips to help us be more intentional readers so we can grow in all areas of life. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. And until next time, go create something.